The Trojan War is one of the greatest and most enduring legends in Greek mythology, a tale woven with the threads of love and betrayal, heroism and vengeance, fate and divine intervention. It is a story that has captivated poets, historians, and storytellers for millennia, retold in epic poems like Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, inspiring countless works of literature, art, and theater throughout history. It was a war fought not only by kings and warriors, but also by gods and goddesses, whose rivalries and interventions shaped the course of battle. A conflict that stretched across 10 long years, drawing in the mightiest heroes of Greece and the proud defenders of Troy. It was a war sparked by the love of a woman, said to be the most beautiful in the world, yet fueled by pride, ambition, and the inescapable will of fate. The clash between the Greeks and Trojans would see friendships shattered, cities burned, and legendary figures rise and fall. And in the end, it would culminate in the complete destruction of the mighty city of Troy, reduced to ash and ruin. This is the story of how it began and how it ended in fire and devastation. The war did not start on the battlefield, nor with swords and shields, but with a single moment of divine mischief, an act of jealousy that would ripple across both the heavens and the mortal world. The gods of Olympus had gathered for a momentous occasion, the wedding of Peleus, a mortal king, and Thetis, a beautiful sea nymph. Their union had been arranged by Zeus himself, for it had been prophesied that the son born from their union would become greater than his father. To avoid any threat to his rule, Zeus ensured that Thetis, desired even by gods, would marry a mortal instead. The halls of Olympus were filled with laughter, music, and feasting as the gods reveled in the grand celebration. All were invited to attend, save one. Eris, the goddess of discord, had been deliberately excluded, for wherever she went, chaos followed. But Eris was not one to accept such an insult lightly. Seething with rage, she sought vengeance, not through violence, but through the power of temptation and rivalry. She crafted a golden apple, gleaming and perfect, and upon its surface she inscribed 3 simple but fateful words, "To the fairest." Unseen, she cast the apple into the midst of the banquet. As soon as it was noticed, the festivities ground to a halt, for its message ignited immediate conflict. 3 of the most powerful goddesses laid claim to it: Hera, the queen of the gods; Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war; and Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. Each was certain that she alone deserved the title of the fairest, and each was unwilling to relinquish the prize. But who among them was truly the most beautiful? None would yield to the others, and so they sought the judgment of Zeus. However, Zeus, wise and knowing the dangers of choosing one goddess over the others, refused to decide. He knew that his ruling would bring the eternal wrath of the rejected goddesses, setting the heavens into chaos. Instead, he cleverly delegated the choice to a mortal, Paris, the young prince of Troy, a decision that would change the fate of the world forever. Paris was no ordinary prince, though he had never worn the robes of royalty nor lived within the grand halls of Troy. Before he was even born, his fate had been decided. A prophecy had warned that he would one day bring ruin to his homeland. His mother, Queen Hecuba, had a terrifying dream while she carried him in her womb, a vision of a flaming torch, burning brightly, consuming the entire city of Troy. Disturbed by the dream, King Priam sought the wisdom of the oracles, and their words confirmed his worst fears. His unborn son would be the cause of Troy's destruction. A child who was destined to bring death and despair could not be allowed to live. So with a heavy heart, Priam ordered that his newborn son be abandoned on the desolate slopes of Mount Ida. There, far from the golden walls of Troy, the infant was left to die, exposed to the elements, his cries unheard. But fate had other plans. A kind-hearted shepherd stumbled upon the helpless child and took him in as his own. Paris grew up not as a prince, but as a simple herdsman, tending to his flocks, unaware of his true lineage. He lived in peace, far removed from the throne that should have been his, until the fateful day when the goddesses of Olympus descended from the heavens, changing his destiny forever. Hera, queen of the gods; Athena, goddess of wisdom and war; and Aphrodite, goddess of love and beauty, appeared before Paris in all their divine splendor, demanding that he make a choice that no mortal should ever have to make. Each goddess coveted a golden apple, inscribed with the words, "To the fairest." The apple had been cast among them by Eris, the goddess of discord, setting off a rivalry that only Paris could resolve. Each goddess offered him a gift, a bribe more tempting than the last, in exchange for being named the fairest among them. Hera, the powerful queen of Olympus, promised Paris dominion over all the world, the power to rule as the greatest king who had ever lived, feared and respected by all. Athena, the wise and cunning warrior, offered him unmatched skill in battle, the strength to lead armies and never taste defeat, to become the greatest warrior the world had ever known. But Aphrodite, with a knowing smile, whispered a different promise. Not power, not military glory, but love. She vowed to give him the heart of the most beautiful woman in the world, Helen of Sparta. Paris, still young and impressionable, was blinded by desire. He cared little for power or conquest, and the thought of eternal glory on the battlefield did not entice him. But the promise of love, true, passionate, undeniable love, was irresistible. He reached out his hand, placed the golden apple in Aphrodite's palm, and sealed his fate. For in that moment, the fate of Troy was also sealed. Paris had unknowingly set in motion a chain of events that would lead to war, destruction, and the fall of the mighty city. The most beautiful woman in the world was Helen of Sparta, wife of King Menelaus. Her beauty was renowned across the lands, said to be a gift from the gods themselves. Men desired her, poets sang of her, and kings envied the man who had won her heart. But Helen's fate would soon be caught in the tides of war. Some say that Paris stole her away in the dead of night, seducing her with Aphrodite's divine power, making her forget her home, her husband, and her past. Others claim that Helen went willingly, drawn to the Trojan prince by his charm, his youth, and the promise of passion and adventure. But whether she was taken by force or by choice, her absence was an unforgivable offense. When Menelaus awoke to find his wife gone, his fury knew no bounds. This was not just a personal betrayal, it was an act of war. He turned to his brother, Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece, and demanded vengeance. Agamemnon, ever ambitious and eager for conquest, saw an opportunity not just to reclaim Helen, but to expand his power and crush the mighty city of Troy. He sent messengers across Greece, calling upon the greatest warriors of the land to join the campaign. Among them was Achilles, the fiercest warrior the world had ever seen, son of the sea goddess Thetis, his body nearly invincible. There was Odysseus, the cunning and resourceful strategist, reluctant to leave his kingdom of Ithaca, his wife Penelope, and his newborn son. Ajax, a giant among men, unmatched in raw strength, a warrior feared by all who faced him. And Nestor, the seasoned counselor, whose wisdom would guide the Greeks through the long and grueling war ahead. Across the land, kingdoms rallied their armies, and a massive fleet was assembled, 1,000 ships, each filled with warriors eager for glory and revenge. As the sails unfurled and the winds carried them across the Aegean Sea, the Greeks believed their victory would be swift. Troy would fall, Helen would be returned, and the world would remember their triumph. But what awaited them was not a quick conquest, but a brutal war that would last for 10 long years. A war that would cost thousands of lives and lead to the destruction of one of the greatest cities ever known. The Greeks landed on the shores of Troy, confident in their strength, expecting a swift and decisive victory. They had brought with them 1,000 ships, an army of the greatest warriors in Greece, and the firm belief that Troy would fall quickly beneath their swords. But Troy was no ordinary city. Its walls had been built by the gods themselves, Poseidon and Apollo, towering high, impenetrable to any siege. No army had ever breached its gates, and the Greeks soon realized that this would not be a quick conquest, but a long and brutal war. For 9 relentless years, both sides fought bitterly. The fields outside Troy ran red with the blood of heroes, yet the city stood firm, unyielding against the onslaught. The Trojans, led by their noble prince Hector, proved to be fearsome defenders. Hector, the eldest son of King Priam, was not just Troy's greatest warrior, but also its heart and soul. He fought not for personal glory or ambition, but for his homeland, his people, and his family. He was beloved by the Trojans, a leader who inspired both courage and loyalty. Among the Greeks, there was only one warrior who could rival Hector, Achilles. The son of the sea goddess Thetis, Achilles was the deadliest fighter in all of Greece, a warrior whose very name struck fear into his enemies. He was nearly invincible, his body impervious to harm, save for a single weakness: his heel, where his mother had held him when she dipped him in the river Styx as an infant. But Achilles' greatest weakness was not physical, it was his pride. When Agamemnon, the commander of the Greek forces, insulted him, taking away his prized war captive, Briseis, Achilles' rage boiled over. He felt dishonored, his pride wounded beyond repair. In a fit of fury, he withdrew from battle, refusing to fight. Without their greatest champion, the Greeks began to struggle. Seizing the opportunity, Hector led the Trojan forces in a series of bold counterattacks. Wave after wave, the Trojans pushed the Greeks back, pressing them against their own ships. The once confident Greek army now teetered on the brink of collapse. It seemed, for the first time, that Troy might actually win the war. The Greek forces were crumbling, their warriors demoralized, and their ships threatened by the relentless Trojan advance. With Achilles still refusing to fight, the situation grew desperate. But there was one man who could not stand idly by: Patroclus, Achilles' closest friend, his companion in war and in life. Determined to save his fellow Greeks, Patroclus devised a daring plan. He would wear Achilles' armor, take his mighty weapons, and lead the Greeks into battle himself. If the Trojans believed Achilles had returned, they might retreat in fear, giving the Greeks a chance to regain control. At first, the deception worked. The Greek forces rallied, pushing the Trojans back toward the gates of Troy. But then, Hector himself stepped forward to meet the warrior he believed was Achilles. A brutal battle ensued, and though Patroclus fought bravely, he was no match for Hector's skill. The Trojan prince struck him down, delivering a fatal blow. As Patroclus lay dying, his identity was revealed, and with his final breath, he uttered a warning: "Achilles will come for you. My death will be avenged." When Achilles learned of Patroclus's fate, his grief was overwhelming. He did not simply mourn. His sorrow turned to fury, a rage so consuming that even the gods trembled. He swore vengeance upon Hector, vowing that no force on heaven or earth would stop him. Achilles stormed onto the battlefield, his rage unmatched, his presence terrifying. Greek and Trojan warriors alike stepped aside, knowing that this battle belonged only to two men. Hector stood before the gates of Troy, knowing that his fate had arrived. He could not outrun it, nor could he hide from it. He had slain the man Achilles loved most, and now he would have to face the consequences. The two titans clashed, their weapons striking like thunder, their battle echoing across the walls of Troy. Hector fought valiantly, but Achilles was unstoppable, moving with godlike speed and fury. With a final, devastating strike, Achilles' spear found its mark, piercing Hector's heart. But Achilles' rage was not yet satisfied. Overcome with grief and vengeance, he tied Hector's body to his chariot, dragging it through the dirt, parading it before the walls of Troy, as the Trojan people wept in horror. Inside Troy, an old man wept more than any other: King Priam, Hector's father. His son, his greatest warrior, his beloved heir, was gone. But worse than death itself was the sight of his son's lifeless body, desecrated in the dust. In one of the most tragic and moving moments of the war, the aged king walked alone into the Greek camp, stepping into the tent of Achilles himself. He fell to his knees before his son's killer, not as a king, but as a grieving father. "I have endured what no man has endured before," Priam whispered. "I have kissed the hand of the man who killed my son." His words pierced Achilles' heart. For the first time in years of war, the great warrior felt something beyond rage. He saw his own father in Priam's sorrow, and at last his wrath subsided. Moved by the old king's sorrow, Achilles relented. He returned Hector's body, allowing Troy to bury its fallen prince with honor. But even as the flames of Hector's funeral pyre rose into the sky, the war was far from over. Troy's fate was already sealed. Though mighty beyond measure, Achilles was not immortal. His mother, Thetis, a sea goddess, had sought to protect him from all harm, knowing that he was destined for greatness, but also for an early death. When he was an infant, she dipped him into the river Styx, whose waters granted invulnerability to all they touched. But as she held him by his heel, that single spot remained untouched by the river's magic, leaving it his only weakness. For years, Achilles had fought as though he could not be killed, and to those who saw him charge into battle, striking down warrior after warrior, it seemed as if he truly was invincible. But the gods do not allow such arrogance to go unpunished. His death came not at the hands of a mighty warrior, but from a single arrow, guided by fate itself. Paris, Prince of Troy, loosed the fateful shot, but it was not his skill alone that doomed Achilles. It was Apollo, the god of prophecy and archery, who guided the arrow to its mark. The shaft struck Achilles in the heel, and the greatest warrior of Greece fell, fulfilling the prophecy of his demise. Yet, even with Achilles gone, the war raged on. Troy still stood, unbroken, its great walls defying the Greeks at every turn. It seemed impenetrable, and many wondered if it would ever fall. But then, Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, devised a plan, a deception so brilliant, so unexpected, that it would change history forever. After 10 long years of war, the Greeks had failed to breach the mighty walls of Troy. Every assault had been repelled, every strategy had failed. Troy seemed untouchable. But where brute force had failed, deception would succeed. At the command of Odysseus, the cunning king of Ithaca, the Greeks constructed a massive wooden horse, hollow on the inside. It stood tall, towering over the battlefield, an apparent tribute to the gods. Then, in a dramatic display, the Greek army retreated, sailing away from the shores of Troy, or so it seemed. The Trojans rejoiced, believing that their decade-long siege had finally ended in victory. They dragged the massive wooden horse into their city, ignoring the desperate warnings of Cassandra, the doomed prophetess cursed never to be believed, and Laocoon, the priest who cried, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts." That night, as the Trojans celebrated, drinking and feasting in the streets, their fate was already sealed. Under the cover of darkness, Greek warriors hidden inside the horse emerged. They silently opened the city gates, allowing the Greek army, which had returned under nightfall, to flood into Troy. Then the slaughter began. The city burned, its temples, palaces, and homes consumed in fire. King Priam was slaughtered in his palace, cut down as he clutched the altar of Zeus, begging for mercy. The Trojan women were seized, taken as slaves and concubines, while the children of the royal family were cast from the city walls, erasing Troy's future in a single night of horror. And Helen, the woman whose beauty had launched the war, was found and taken back to Sparta. Some say Menelaus intended to kill her for her betrayal, but upon seeing her again, he was overcome by love and took her back instead. Others claim she was dragged back in chains, a captive of war. Thus, Troy fell. A city once mighty, once proud, was reduced to ashes and ruin. And so, after 10 years of war, countless lives lost, and legends forged in blood, the war finally ended, not in glory, but in fire and death. For the Greeks, victory came at a terrible cost. Though Troy lay in ruins, though its people were slaughtered or enslaved, the war's end did not bring peace, only more suffering. Many of the greatest Greek warriors never saw their homelands again. The gods had not forgotten the bloodshed, nor had they forgiven the arrogance of the victors. The sea, once a path homeward, became a place of peril and punishment. Agamemnon, the mighty king who led the Greeks to war, returned home only to meet his own end, betrayed and murdered by his wife Clytemnestra and her lover, seeking vengeance for the daughter he had sacrificed before the war began. Ajax, the colossal warrior, whose pride had been wounded when Achilles' armor was awarded to Odysseus instead of him, fell into madness. Unable to bear the humiliation, he took his own life. And Odysseus, the brilliant mind behind the Trojan horse, found himself cursed to wander the seas for another 10 years, facing monsters, sorcery, and the wrath of Poseidon before he could finally return to Ithaca. The story of the Trojan War is more than a legend. It is a tale of fate, honor, and tragedy, a story of pride and vengeance, love and loss. A tale that has endured for millennia, passed from poets to scribes, from storytellers to historians, a tale that will continue to be told for generations to come.